space. I'm the Vice President of IGSA and the Managing Director of IGSA Europe. I'm very pleased to welcome my panelist today, hopefully panelists, but for now just one. And these are individuals who I've known for quite a long time and people I very much respect. And while they probably don't need much in the way of an introduction, I will do so momentarily. But first, I wanted to go over some housekeeping items. First and foremost, as you've probably heard when you logged on, this session is being recorded. These videos will be available on our IGSA website, and we will be putting them on our LinkedIn pages as well. Also, if you have any questions while we are going through the webinar, please type them into the Q&A feature on Zoom at the bottom of your screen. I will be monitoring that, and I will either take the questions in line or, depending on the question, we'll leave some time in the end to address those questions. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. First of all, I would like to say that this gentleman has really worn many hats. He's an individual that I can tell you I can go to for rational, reasonable, and well thought out responses to crazy questions that I have on the regulatory front, on the legal affairs front, and even on the operational and technology front. He's a person that has listened to me rant very patiently, and then has, very quietly and calmly explained to me why some of the things I was saying just made absolutely no sense whatsoever. A great guy, an ex-Nevada Gaming Board member, now a consultant in the gaming industry at his own consulting firm called Katsaros Consulting LLC. And I'd like to welcome and thank very much Mr. Phil Katsaros. So Phil, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. That was a very kind and nice introduction for me. You're too humble, though. I don't think there's been many a time when you said something that didn't make complete sense. Usually my answer is, yeah, it would be great if that worked like that. But unfortunately, I'm just one person. So for me to make such a change is going to be a bit difficult, but give me some time.
Because you've worn so many hats and have been in the industry for so long, I wanted to give you just a brief opportunity to talk a little bit about your bio, perhaps.
Sure.
And just give people your background before we jump into the questions.
Sure. I graduated from a university in Michigan and moved out to Nevada pretty much about 2 years later. I had graduated with an accounting degree, but my first job was actually as a coder. I was coding banking software for the first, almost 2 years, and doing tech support. Loved it, but had the opportunity to work for the Gaming Control Board 2 years later and jumped right at it. Moved out to Nevada from Detroit and started auditing casinos and really started to get the baseline down for understanding gaming operations from a brick and mortar perspective. Auditing casinos and looking at internal controls, ensuring they're paying their taxes properly, et cetera. Then I shifted over within the same agency at the Gaming Control Board in Nevada over to our investigative sort of arm. And at that point, I was focused on corporate investigations and also doing some special investigations as well, mostly from a business probity standpoint for licensing purposes, but those would always sometimes dovetail into other matters as well. And then reviewing compliance programs too. And at a certain point, I got an opportunity to move over to Europe. And I said, yes, please, that would be excellent. I started working for IGT over in their Amsterdam office, or just outside of Amsterdam office. And for the better part of 10 years, I was focused on all of Europe and all of Asia from an IGT perspective, brick and mortar perspective. And much of my time, or at least most of my time, was trying to effectuate change at the ground level so that we could properly commercialize our products. What does that mean? Meaning they've got regulations X, Y, and Z in these 10 markets. We need to evolve those because the products that we're developing now, and not just IGT, so it was for the betterment of IGT, but it was also for the betterment, frankly, of other manufacturers, so that we could then provide products that have already evolved and moved beyond EPROMs, for instance. I could go on for hours and probably 60 to 70 jurisdictions where I had to get out there and just lobby for change every step of the way. New market will open up, like Singapore, for instance. That was a new one back then. And you'd get out there and make sure you had a voice. And so you're trying to ensure they're going to implement regulations that was going to help us or not hurt us, and also help the industry, frankly. Then I shifted over to the online side, was doing that for a while. Online gaming was starting to sprout up in North America, New Jersey in particular. So we were at the ground level there. IGT had its online gambling arm. And then I moved out of IGT and started working with a couple of different companies out of Europe, helping them commercialize their products in the US. So for a while, I was heading up business development for a company out of the UK called Inspire. They were trying to bring their virtual sports here. Thereafter was another company. It was a systems-based company, which was so eye-opening to work on that side, because I was always focused more on the slot side, progressive side, and a little bit on the system side. But now I was running the US arm of a company out of Luxembourg trying to commercialize their product here. I could go on forever, but then I went over to got an opportunity at the Gaming Control Board to be a board member where I could really effectuate change, I thought. And actually I did, with the help of some of my colleagues and the staff there. We had a lot of wins during my 4 years there, but my term ran out. And so my term ended in February, and here I am now as a consultant.
And that is why I am so excited that you're on this panel, because your background really, as you've described, runs the gamut from land-based, from technology coding, from an accounting perspective with your education, to commercializing products, to working with regulators, to being a regulator. You really have seen all parts of what is in play today with sports betting. And I'm going to pause for a second because our other panelist is trying to log on. So if you don't mind, I'm going to see if I can help her in understanding what is going on.
I can just continue on just slightly because I missed the whole point. Sports betting.
Yeah, but by all means, I'm going to try and send her a link while you're doing that. So please.
Sure. Yeah, and the other part I missed, which was the sports betting side, which is kind of our focus here today. I had an affinity for sports betting, probably going back into high school, exposing myself a little bit here. We used to do a lot of fun sports pools throughout my high school years, and not just with students, but some adults would join as well. Never took any money. We just throw in a few bucks, and I always knew that was something I was interested in. Probably why I tried to move out to Nevada in the first place, which was I want to get in the gambling industry. But on the sports side in particular, when I was at Nevada, I had direct purview over that area of our regulatory function for quite some time. And I really engrossed myself in the details there on the regulatory side. Had some experience already on the virtual sports side and interfacing with some and dealing with some of the sports betting operators prior to that. But on the regulatory side, it's obviously a whole different ball of wax there of things you need to deal with. But we've seen it go from just a Nevada-centric market, essentially, no disrespect to Delaware and Montana previously, but with the fall of PASPA, we've gone from 3 markets, essentially. Actually, there was a 4th. Oregon, actually, under the Wire Act, could have sports betting, but they chose not to. So from the state level, is illegal. Now we're at 40. And all along that way, I've been able to at least be at the doorstep of some of those markets, watching what's been happening there and trying to learn from them as well, right? Because it's a different world than it was just 5 years ago.
Yeah. I just sent the an updated link to Cynthia, so hopefully she'll be able to join. And if not, we'll do our best to see if we can get run. In the meantime, with everything that you've described, I think it leads very nicely into the first question that I have for you, and we can talk through this, Phil. But for people like you and me and others on this webinar that have been part of this industry for a long time, We see that the proliferation of sports betting in the US is very reminiscent of the proliferation of land-based gaming in the 80s, when Nevada was like the only place, and then New Jersey became the other jurisdiction, and then all of a sudden, up and down the Mississippi, you had riverboats, exploding all over the place. And just like back then, it seems that we are replaying history, in that back then the regulations were a patchwork from state to state. Some people copying Nevada's, doing a search and replace Nevada with their state name and changing some stuff, others starting from scratch. And here we are with sports betting proliferating, like you said, 40 different jurisdictions. And it seems like once again, we are presenting, operators and suppliers with a patchwork of rules and requirements. And we've got companies coming from Europe that are trying to adapt to all these different rules. And my question is this: why is it that we can't seem to manage to, I'm not going to say 100% agree on a set of rules and requirements, but why can't we agree to, I don't know, pick a percentage, 80%, and then leave the difference for the legislative, changes that exist, because of course, all of this is managed at a state level? Why is that?
Yeah,
What are your thoughts?
that's a great question, and I'll frame it just very briefly, differently. Why do we keep screwing it up? And I guess my answer is tradition.
Tradition, right?
All right. I stole that from a movie I'd seen a while ago. But yeah, without question, that's what we're seeing, a patchwork of regulations. Every jurisdiction somewhat going in their own direction, putting their own stamp or imprint on things. And it is predictable, I would say. And it's probably, exacerbated by the fact that the sheer speed of how everything's going, as I mentioned, going from 3 markets to 40 now in a very short period of time. And a lot of those markets may have been under legislative mandates, sort of time crunches, from 2018 to now, right? It fell in May of 2018, I believe. There was a lot of pent up demand from sports bettors, but equally there was a lot of eagerness from the legislators as well, because they saw a lot of dollar signs. Some they thought were going to be bigger than they actually saw in the end, but they still see a lot of dollar signs there. So specifically, why can't we seem to adapt and harmonize? For me, I distill it down to a simple point, although nothing's ever this simple, but for brevity's sake, it's no jurisdiction really cares or sees the benefits of market harmonization, I think. Regulators in their own market, because in the US, we're one big, beautiful country with 50 different sub-countries, essentially, right? Certainly from a gambling perspective, because everybody has their own charter and their own ability to do as they see fit there. So they don't see the benefits necessarily, at least not at an onset.
So let me interrupt you there, because you said something that really resonated with me, right? The challenge, excuse me, yes, please. The challenge is, on the one hand, they see dollar signs, and they've got revenue shortfalls that they wish to address. On the other hand, they've got time crunches, like you said, trying to get this done within a very, expeditious process. And yet, rather than stepping back and saying, okay, if we do this just like another jurisdiction, right? If there are suppliers and operators who are now national, that they're the suppliers and the operators, I mean, if you look at the big ones, they're in multiple different jurisdictions, right? If we make it easier for them to get up and running, the sooner they are up and running, the sooner we start making money. So why not do that? Why instead put more hoops and more obstacles in the way? What is it that sort of prevents them from seeing that as clearly, perhaps, as we do from our side?
So if we look at it from a sort of baseline level, you've got a new agency that may be just being stood up right now. They don't necessarily have the contacts, perhaps, with other markets. And so from a human standpoint, I think oftentimes that's really where some things stop is, oh, I don't know anybody in that market. And then they don't take the next step to say, well, just contact them. You're a regulator now as well. Give them a call, give them a ring. I can tell you just recently, I reached out. Now I'm on the consulting side, trying to educate regulators on a particular product that I'm working with. And I was told, no, we can't talk to you right now. That's just our stance. We don't want to talk to anybody prior to issuing, or going forward with the next step in allowing the market to open up. And I went, wow, that's not a good recipe. I think that's a dangerous recipe to have closed ears. I think as regulators, and certainly personally, I always had open ears, listen to everybody. I don't have to take action on everybody. And I understand what angle somebody may or may not have, but I need to be there to listen, because oftentimes as well, too, and I don't want to miss this point, the legislative mandate might be a bit different than the other states. So it does then create a trickle down effect where you start to get not that 80% harmonization that we might look for, but now we're only at an ability for a 50% harmonization because we've gone completely mobile. For instance, I'll use Tennessee as an example. Not that that's a great example because, okay, it's just mobile now. That's easier. It's just an example of something that a departure from others. Nevada's got an example where you can't even sign up for an account for a sports betting account without presenting myself, my person, in a casino, which, okay, it's really outdated. There's a lot of reasons for that. But again, that's another outlier. But I really distill it down to there's not a benefit sometimes seen by regulators to say, why don't we just do what's being done somewhere else if it's working and then tweak later? And I then put it back on the GA people, the government affairs people of those operators to say, go out there and educate those regulators and try to convince them, just use the blueprint that's already worked. You're going to be a better market for it. You're going to have a better product too, because now you're not going to require special development per se on 90% of everything. And you're going to have a product that's already battle tested somewhere else. You're then going to have better detection measures too, because it's the same piece of software that's operating somewhere else. So if it's working, we've got a bigger sample size. If it's not, it's going to get detected quicker and you can then pivot and require a fix, et cetera. So there's so many benefits there that are not always seen, I think, just at the grassroots level. But we gotta really look at those government affairs people and regulatory compliance people. Are they getting out there and doing it right now? Perhaps not as much, because everybody's in a hyper uber fast growth mode, right? It gets deprioritized, I think.
Well, I having been in that, on that side from an operator perspective, and having worked to educate regulators, and now in my role as IGSA, continuing to try to educate regulators, sometimes you get exactly what you described, that closed ear sort of thing, where they're not ready to listen to you. They're not ready to accept that input and try to understand, what impact that might have. The other thing in sort of defense of the GA guys and the regulatory compliance guys, when they go and they talk to a regulator, the regulator, and maybe I'm completely wrong here, and I've been wrong before, even though you said I haven't, Phil. So if I'm wrong here, just call me out on it. But you've got a GA person or a regulatory compliance person from an operator showing up in front of a regulator. Everything that they're saying, right, the regulator sees as, oh well, these guys just want to make more money. How is this beneficial to my jurisdiction? How is this beneficial to my authority, my agency, blah blah blah? And as a matter of fact, how is it not beneficial? What are they really trying to? Are they pulling the wool over my eyes, kind of thing? So interestingly enough, there was a question in the panel right before this, and the question was, is there a role to be played by associations like IGSA, like NAGRA, the North American Gaming Regulatory Association, by other associations like NICOGs, the National Council for Legislators from Gaming States, if I got that right. And all of the to educate and to really try to impartially, as opposed to one company representing just themselves, but an association is there an opportunity there to help maybe mitigate some of this? The panelists before said absolutely huge opportunity, although quite frankly, I think in not in these words, but they said, the horse has kind of left the barn, right? Especially with sports betting, because everybody, like you said, has already done their own thing. But is there an opportunity now? Okay, they did their thing because they had to for whatever reason. Is there an opportunity now to go back and maybe clean up and start to get that homogeneity that we want. What do you think?
Yeah, no, you're kind of leading me where I was going, and I stopped short because you're right. They're not neutral sort of parties as a single lone manufacturer, supplier, operator, licensee going in there talking to the regulator. It does start the conversation, and that's where I see it starts usually from a grassroots effort. But the trade organizations, the associations like you guys, yes, it's a huge part, because then I think, especially the regulators that are very skeptical of somebody messaging from an individual company, that's where you're going to have a lot more help and a lot more, I'd say, ability to influence some changes. And when I say influence, it's not a derogatory word. It's to help better the market. I don't think the horse has left the barn just yet. I think it's predictable where we're at, and now it's catch up. I guess I can draw a parallel to the slots world, where GLI standards are, pervasive across the world now. Not everywhere. There's some tweaks here and there, but in like California, for instance, if I got a GLI 11 certificate, I can go to any tribe almost, the exception of one or two, and I'm good to go with my certificate. We'll get there at a certain, and those are different, 70 different tribal nations, different countries. So we talked about 50 countries. That's not even true. Okay, we've got hundreds of then sovereign tribal nations as well. So yeah, forgive me, I cut down my speech sometime when I shouldn't. But without a doubt, we can't just put it on the GA folks, but it is the GO folks that should be trying to go to those trade organizations, the associations as well, to try to push them to enact that change as well and go hand in hand there. We've definitely had some efforts just from grassroots level when I was at IGT with some other manufacturers in a particular market. I'll call out, some of my heritage in Greece, the most difficult place way back when, in order to evolve and get new technology deployed on a casino floor, I would say bar none in the world. And we kind of went together with some other manufacturers and tried to effectuate change. It didn't really help in that case, but that was the effort that was needed. We got there though. I know things are gotten much better now, and I'm told they're in a good state. I haven't operated there in a while, so I don't know. But no, for sure, without associations and organizations like yourself, I think we're going to fall short. Woefully, we'll be woefully short.
So all that being said, we're talking about regulations, right? At this point, and those regulations, as you know, bleed into requirements for reporting. They bleed into requirements for how the operators have to operate. They bleed into requirements such as, how markets are presented, how they're approved. And I'm a sports betting novice. Cynthia has joined us.
Hi,
Cynthia, you're on mute. There
So many apologies, I can't even start.
No. Actually, Cynthia, let me tell you, we had technology problems in the first session, and that session started 20 minutes late. So no apologies needed. Technology sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't. But now that you've joined us, let me take a step back. And Phil, you're now off the hook for the full hour.
Hi, Cynthia.
I'm sorry, Phil. I owe you.
Let me do a quick introduction of Cynthia. So whereas I said I've known Phil for a long time, I've known Cynthia even longer. I've known Cynthia since I had hair, right? She's not going to agree to that. Okay, fine. So Cynthia is one of my dearest friends, somebody who I respect tremendously, and somebody who has been, in addition to my friend, my colleague in a number of different companies. She also has worn many different hats. And of late, she is the Vice President of Compliance at BetFred, focusing on the Americas and, only on sports betting. So Cynthia, so glad that you persevered and you were able to join us, and welcome. And I wanted to pause, just like I did with Phil, and allow you to maybe expound a little bit on your resume if you so choose.
Sure. I mean, I've been in the gaming business for over 20 years now. I started out at Harrah's, So started out on the operator side, and then ended up going to WMS Gaming. So I got some manufacturing side stuff too. And then of course, WMS was purchased by Scientific Games. So ended up dipping my toe into the lottery waters as well. But really preferred the operations side. And so I got back into operations with Jack Entertainment in 2018, 18 or 17. And then they were going through a restructuring. And so I started looking for positions and I ended up finding BetFred. And they started me off as a consultant. And I was a consultant for them for about 3.5 months. And then they offered me an agreement to start January 1, 2020. And so I've been, for a long time, I was the only member of the compliance team, which was okay. Okay, when we had 2 jurisdictions, suddenly became not okay. You know, when we launched 3 more, 4 more, you know, we're now up to 10. So that's a lot of work at a lot of different jurisdictions. And as you guys were alluding to, completely different regulations and requirements.
And so thank you very much. And that's a great segue into exactly what Phil and I were discussing. We spent some time talking about the regulations themselves and why the regulations are as different as they are. Why, once again, just like we did with land-based in the 80s, we find ourselves with this patchwork of different regulations. Phil gave us I think a pretty articulate answer. I'll give you a chance to add if you wish, Cynthia.
Yeah, so unfortunately, a lot of the requirements come from the regulations, and the interpretation of the regulations really sometimes differs between the regulator and the operator. So what they may see as one way, we may see as another. I mean, obviously, in the end, they win. I mean, we can make arguments and we can, you know, talk about mitigating factors, and we can do all that, and we can offer, you know, other solutions. But ultimately, they're going to be the ones responsible to reporting to their higher ups, you know, which might not only include the director, but also the Attorney General's office. So I think that's part of the real reason, is the way the regulations are written. It would be really hard for all of them to come to an agreement on one set.
And therein lies the problem, right? Phil was mentioning that there's, in many cases, fixed deadlines by which these jurisdictions have to enact the regulations. They've got, you know, budgetary issues that they're trying to shore up from operating, you know, sports betting. So everybody's rushing to get stuff done. In some cases, these are new agencies that are being set up from scratch. There are people that, you know, don't have the connection, so they can't really reach out effectively to other jurisdictions and say, hey, what have you done? I've got these questions. Can you help me? And so right before you joined us, we were talking about, you know, what role can associations like IGSA, like NAGRA, like NICOGS and others, you know, potentially have in trying to help educate and not put the burden simply on government affairs and compliance individuals at the various different operator and supplier companies who, like you said, are having a conversation with the regulators. You're putting forth very cogent arguments, but at the end of the day, you represent BetFred, somebody might represent MGM, somebody might represent, DraftKings, and everybody's seen as, oh, well, they're trying to do the best for their company and maybe not the best for my agency and my jurisdiction and for the industry. I was going to move away from regulations, and when you joined us, Cynthia, I was saying like regulations, sort of beget then all of the other issues that we have, and we have issues with the requirements themselves. We have issues with reporting. We have issues with the markets and how the markets are different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. We have differences in how the markets have to be submitted and approved. And I was saying I'm not a sports betting expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm befuddled by this, especially when you think about, for example, let's take football. All right, so football.
Who's football?
American football.
Okay,
I'll be specific. American football. Yeah.
Yeah, the soccer tournament, sort of had us changing our minds on that.
Mr. XYZ over there.
That was for you.
So let's talk about American football. Okay, so pick any jurisdiction that has approved sports betting, right? And the players, wagering on American football or wagering on the same game. Why is it that the markets might vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction? What's the reason behind that?
I think it's what the jurisdiction is comfortable with.
But what does that mean in terms of, the rules of the football game are the same, regardless of whether you're watching them and betting on them in Nevada versus New Jersey, just to pick two jurisdictions.
So when you talk about the markets being different, are you talking about limits? Are you talking about?
It could be limits. It could be the wagers that you could place. It could be the prop bets that you could place. The whole thing. Even the process of submitting and approving these markets ahead of actually making them available to the players, they're all different. Why, when it's the same game? Is it again a comfortable fact, a comfortable or less comfortable issue? Is it tied to specific verbiage in the regulations? What is it? Why can't we get homogeneity there?
I think it's a little of both.
Okay.
And I kind of throw those sort of, if I look at like policy changes and policy development, I usually put them in kind of like 4 different buckets. And one of them is always budgetary consideration. So taxes, obviously, that's why we have sports betting everywhere. But there's also the element of trying to legitimize an illegal activity that's already occurring anyway, right? We have that not just with sports betting, with other things. But another thing that drives change and effectuates change is technology changes. But the other one is social protections. So I think in some cases, when they're talking about, to your point on your questions on different markets and different allowances in this versus that, it's under that umbrella of, well, we think the market and the players are better protected from a social protection standpoint if we limit that you cannot bet on any sport for a university that's in our state. I'll just use that as an example. Nevada had that forever. It fell at a certain point, and some states still have that now. Does it really provide for better integrity or not? Or is it just under the guise of social protections? I won't, well, actually my personal opinion is probably doesn't really matter whether that state or whether that university resides in a particular state or not. You're probably not doing much. I have open ears on the topic because somebody wanted to convince me otherwise, but that's where I think a lot of those differences come into play. We think that limit needs to be A, B, or C, or we think that, this betting market should not be allowed because of a particular reason. European view versus US view. Can we bet on politics, right? Can we bet on, the presidential election, for instance, right? We see that as a bad thing here. For right or for wrong. And so again, under that social protections umbrella.
So let me go back to a point that you made about universities, colleges, college sports in a particular jurisdiction, and that jurisdiction not allowing it. I think Michigan, based on what the prior panelists, the panelists in the prior session said, still does not allow that. Cynthia, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, New Jersey still doesn't allow it. There are a couple other states that don't allow it. Washington doesn't allow it. I think what they're trying to do is to show they're protecting the integrity of sports betting.
But are they really? Because if you think about, from a risk perspective, right, there are companies out there that are very much watching the betting that is occurring on legal markets, and they're potentially sniffing out. I'll use that word on purpose. Unusual betting that is occurring on legal markets, and then working with the regulators and reporting this. And there's a mechanism to identify when something that shouldn't be might be happening. That is not happening if those college sports are not legalized. And to say that nobody is betting on those college sports is, obviously a fallacy. Of course they are. So isn't in essence, aren't they actually maybe misleading themselves and saying that they're protecting something, but really what they're doing is not protecting it? And maybe I'm being a little too judgmental, maybe I'm being a little too, black and white here, but just out of curiosity, what do you guys think? Are they pushing wagering on those sports to the illegal side of things, where there are zero protections, versus bringing them into the light and adding transparency and applying some of the capabilities that have been developed to ensure integrity?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
That's a good point. You bring up a good point. I was going to mention Rutgers, but I couldn't remember if New Jersey ever changed it. Now, I bet on college football and what have you, but I don't have any affinity to bet on any Rutgers games. If I'm New Jersey, I might. So I'll take a little twist to that. If there's a propensity to try to influence a game, a Rutgers game, I don't need to do it in New Jersey. I can just go across the border if I wanted to. So now I'm losing the detection mechanisms if somebody was doing it in New Jersey, because perhaps I can detect that anomaly better if I'm closer to it. Is that part of what you're saying?
I'm speculating that if we prohibit something, people are going to go figure out a way how to do it anyway. And if they're doing it anyway, and we know they're doing it anyway, this is a bit of a slippery slope argument. I get that, but if they're doing it anyways, and we have already legalized 90+% of something, why don't we legalize the last bit and make sure that we're really affording protections, because we have the mechanisms to do so. I don't know if those mechanisms work. Like I said, I'm a novice in sports betting, so you guys tell me, is this a bad idea? Is my logic flawed here? It's been before. Both of you know that.
So, I wonder if something or part of this has to do with responsible gaming. All the studies that have come out now about college students and their propensity to become addicts if they start young. I don't know. I kind of agree with you. If I was going to bet somewhere, I would want it to be where my money was protected and where I was protected. Which is why I've never had a bookie or an offshore account. I think it goes back to that comfort level.
Yeah.
And that's why we're going to continue to have a patchwork approach, because every gaming authority in every different jurisdiction is going to have a different, potentially, comfort level.
And yep. I didn't even speak to the illegal part of it that Cynthia just responded to, because you mentioned that, Mark. Yeah, you can just go down to your bookie as well. And we know those bookies still exist, frankly. People will go to them for various reasons. Pricing's one, convenience is other. They offer credit, right? You settle up with your bookie once a week. you don't have to front the cash, right?
Mhm.
And that's a huge sort of enticement for people to go to them. The con of that, or the flip side of that coin, is people don't want to necessarily go to illegal channels. Most people, lion's share of folks, do not want to go through illegal channels, but they'll only be dissuaded by so much. You put so many hurdles in front of them, and they're gonna.
So let's move on to the next piece of this. We've talked about regulations. We've talked about the processes. We didn't so much talk about reporting, but reporting again is going to be very much tied to the requirements of each jurisdiction and what they're comfortable in collecting and believe they need to collect in order to provide the oversight. So I get that. Let's go to the next thing, which is technology. Is technology from a sports betting perspective being adopted equally across the different jurisdictions? I know that there are some things, for example, that my friend Chris Fleener and in the Ohio Casino Control Commission that they've done in terms of using IGSA standards like network GAT to authenticate and validate sports betting platform software is a really good thing. I don't see that being adopted, widely yet across the U.S. So from a technology perspective, what do you guys think? Is it again sort of hit or miss comfort level, or is technology by and large equal across the different jurisdictions?
I think it's pretty much equal. But again, some jurisdictions have their own labs. Some jurisdictions just use GLI or BMM. But I think when it comes to technology, everybody's a little bit leery. And I think we all became leery of that during ticketing, right? Because there were so many times that we would do an upgrade or do a change and it would break 100 things. That's not new to sports betting, and it still happens. You have to have an incredible working relationship with your suppliers and with your platform providers and with, all of those technology partners.
So a lot of complexities in providing the end product, and because of those complexities and the integrations that need to happen, regulators are somewhat leery to maybe adopt certain technologies quickly because they think, oh, well, this is only going to cause more stuff to break.
Well, yeah, and I worked with a regulator for a long time who you know very well, Mark. And all he used to say was, I don't care as we're not first because I don't want my name on the front page.
Yep.
Um,
And for those on this call, it wasn't Phil.
There was not.
No, it was not.
That's a great quote, Cynthia, because I think a lot of regulators, and I don't want to use a broad brush, but having been it, I can bash some of them, I think, they're driven by fear sometimes. I'm not one of those. I'm a little bit more on the aggressive side to say, let's do it. Let's move forward, because in the broader scheme, in the broader picture, this is going to be a benefit. Is there going to be some things that are broken and some things that need to be fixed along the way? 100%. Don't worry about that penny. Go reach over for the dollar. Okay. We'll fix that. And so, yeah, that's definitely not something that would come out of my mouth.
Yeah.
And yet, right. While you say that, Phil, I think what we see as the reality, and we've got a question from one of the attendees that I'm going to refer to here. What we see is approval cycles for products, for systems, taking longer and longer and longer, because the regulators are of the mindset, as Cynthia said, they're fearful. They don't want their name or their jurisdiction to be on the front page of any, newsfeed, right? So is this really the reason why it takes so long? Is it because the systems are complicated? Is there something that we can do as an industry to maybe speed things up?
Well, honestly, I mean, the problem is, as an operator, our top items don't necessarily align with our suppliers. So when we want something or need something, it ends up going into a queue. And sometimes we have no idea when that's going to happen.
But if it's a regulatory requirement, or if it's a regulatory issue, does that expedite things, or not really?
To some extent, yes.
Hmm. And so from an approval perspective, not just of products but also of companies, is that why it also takes so long? Because the regulators also just want to make sure that not only are the T's crossed and I's dotted, but everything is like perfect.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's that expectation that it's 100% bulletproof almost, and nothing is ever going to be, right? We always need to be mindful first and foremost of the patrons. So that game integrity, right? That product that's being delivered to them, that's what I would want to have to be bulletproof for sure. If there was going to be an anomaly because something wasn't reporting properly and such that, perhaps a few pennies on the taxes weren't accounted for properly at the onset, we'll get it later through audits and what have you, another mechanism. That was always just a deprioritized item for me, because the state is better if we're allowing for that technology to be more rapidly deployed in the marketplace and harmonized with other requirements around as well. We talked earlier about having harmonized products allows for better detection measurements as well. So I can better detect if there's an issue with the product, because this product's operating in 500 other markets around the world. Right. So now I know I have there's nothing better than a battle tested product on the floor. It will always be better tested in that fashion than somebody doing it in a lab. We of course need labs to test it prior, but that's the best way a product is battle tested, right? And we know that it works. You grow in a bubble when you start to require special development and you deviate from the mainline software programming. Right now, you've got a separate product. You've now, as a marketplace, has decided you're going to grow in a bubble. That's a recipe for disaster, and it doesn't better anybody.
And so this actually leads me into my next question, and some might say, well, this is a bit self-serving from an IGSA perspective, but be that as it may, the other reason why it might take longer for regulators and for independent test labs to test all the stuff, to make sure that everything is absolutely buttoned up to the degree that is required. Another reason might be that a lot of the technology being used is proprietary, and therefore you're retesting a mechanism to do something 5 or 6 different times, because you've got 5 or 6 different platforms, different suppliers, different game providers, even different what have you. What is it that is preventing the industry from adopting standards that would potentially speed up the approval process? Is it a belief that, no, Mark, you're wrong, it's not going to speed up the process? Is it B, no, those proprietary implementations provide us differentiating factors and therefore, we want to keep them? Or is it C, something else? What do you guys think?
Oh no, that one's kind of tough.
That's why I'm asking you two.
I know.
I think it's a combination. Frankly, I don't think it's a either or on some of these. But I think it starts with the regulator having a desire to better their market. They sometimes are often driven by fear. They don't want to see their name in the newspaper, but they got to have the desire to want to harmonize with other markets, and they don't see the benefits sometimes where there should. And so it needs to even start from above them, from the policymakers, to say, hey, you need to fix your house. Your house is a little broken. I'll use one example in Nevada. Our governor, during the State of the State address this year, came in and said, we got a problem with our lab in Nevada, the technology department in Nevada, flat out in his State of the State speech, which is not something normally a governor would do. And he was right. We've sort of started to lose focus on what it is we're supposed to be doing and should be focusing on. We're not providing a better service to the industry when we lengthen these approval timeframes. We're not. The experts out there are those independent test labs. We should be relying on them more so, frankly, in my mind. There should always be a regulator there as the backstop. But to answer your question, those regulators, those people in power that control that slow down that process or have the ability to throttle up or throttle down, they need to be told by their superiors that, hey, this needs to change, because we're not providing a better product here for the market. Are we actually harming the industry? So a lot of times the regulators will talk about, well, I don't want to have a stain on our industry either. Are people actually in the US right now going to say another market and saying, oh, this machine is less safe in Oklahoma, it's more safe in Nevada? No, they know that's not the case, frankly, right? It's not as if we're providing a better, more robust process by putting our stamp of approval on things. So little long-winded answer there. But in the end, people still have to have the confidence in the marketplace so that when they know that they're gambling on a product, that it's done so fairly. I don't think there's any markets in the US where people don't feel they're being treated fairly, or at least as per the rules and regulations are. There's going to be anomalies and outliers, and that's why you have a dispute process, and every state has it. And so that those can be caught with that net. But the lion's share of every marketplace out there, the people out there are like, okay, we get it. This is regulated and they're operated fairly.
So let me go way down into the weeds for a second. I think what you're suggesting, Phil, is that if, for example, there's a communication protocol that is a standard one that can be used across 3 or 4 different technologies that need to talk to each other, and if the technical people, either in the lab, be it a state lab or be it an independent lab, were to have the ability to go upstream and say, hey guys, if you would prohibit perhaps proprietary implementations of this, if you guys would say you have to adopt the standard, our job would be simpler. We would be able to do things faster. They would not be worse. Maybe they wouldn't be better, right? But at least we can get technology, we can get these products approved through the process faster, get them into the marketplace, and continue to grow the industry without risking being a stain on our jurisdiction. Is that a fair representation of what you just said?
It's a very fair representation, and it starts with the IGSA and other organizations like yourself actually effectuating change, right? For instance, I think Ohio with your reporting protocol there, it starts with one market and then it starts to spread like a tentacle, if you will. And it's kind of like the Monopoly board. Once you start to win, you pretty much, now you're on a roll, but you got to get a few of those markets first to sign up.
Cynthia, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I also wonder, I mean, it's been a while since I looked at it, but how many manufacturers have adopted GLA or GSA? Like, are there still a bunch of them out there that have not?
So without giving you a number, I can tell you that, for example, from a land-based perspective, all the suppliers that supply games in Illinois on the route market, to Oregon State Lottery in the route market, and all of the what they lovingly call VLTs in Canada, which are nothing more than class 3 machines, but like Nevada style machines. All of those suppliers have adopted GSA standards. And then all suppliers are providing games in Greece, they are providing games in Austria, they are providing games in other countries around the world. All of them have adopted standards. Do they market that? No, because it really, operators don't really care what communication protocol is used. But if all of a sudden, and I think this is why I said it the way I did, Phil, if all of a sudden the technology lab individuals felt empowered to be able to say, hey, the reason why we move so slow is because we're constantly having to test stuff that we're reinventing the wheel. If there was one wheel and there was a standard wheel, right, then we could go. I mean, imagine this. Imagine that if every gas nozzle in a car was a different size. So when you pulled into a gas station, you have to go find the nozzle that fit your gas tank hole. It would be a disaster. I mean, it's bad enough that some cars have the gas tank on the left and others have it on the right. That's already bad enough. And you see it. I mean, I go and get gas at Costco. I mean, people don't know which side of their freaking car the gas tank is, right? I mean, it's incredible. So if we could adopt standards, isn't that going to move things faster? I mean, but they have to feel empowered. I think what happens today is, number one, they don't feel like it's in their job description to do that. And I think even those that do might sometimes just run into a brick wall. And I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to. They're bureaucrats, right? And as the old saying goes, nobody gives you an attaboy for taking a risk if you're a bureaucrat, but God help you if you make a mistake. I paraphrased.
Yeah.
Am I making sense, Cynthia? Or you're looking up, you're thinking?
No, you're making sense. But for those people who did not adopt it initially,
yeah,
it's probably a big lift.
Yeah, it is, without a doubt. But if it is a big lift that has an ROI because they can get their products through faster, right? And if they actually did the exercise, then maybe it would work.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I just know that, originally we had a ton of pushback. I mean, I think Fleener was like the first adopter of all of this when he was in Missouri.
So,
I mean,
so bottom line, oh, sorry, go ahead.
He jumped on board immediately.
So I think bottom line, what we've said in this hour that has gone by very, very quickly is that there are a number of reasons why we have a patchwork of regulations and a patchwork of requirements and a patchwork that unfortunately continues to cause things to be different jurisdiction by jurisdiction and slow things down. That there is perhaps an ability for associations working with suppliers and operators to affect some change, but that has to be sort of measured by the willingness of each regulator to listen and to internalize, to think about, and to potentially act upon them. And I think we shouldn't give up, bottom line. We should continue to try and do this. And if at first we don't succeed, and we won't, we should keep trying again. I think that's the message that I heard. Did I summarize your thinking correctly?
Yeah, I think if you get the regulators to be proponents, then everybody else doesn't really have a choice.
Very well said. Focus on
Gotta
the
have that
regulator.
willingness, and once you get a regulator or two, it's a great thought, Cynthia. They can be proponents for you in speaking with the other markets as well. But IGSA and organizations like you guys are hugely important. They're neutral arbiters, and they do have a big voice. So hopefully you guys continue to use it.
Thank you. And thank you very much for your participation. Cynthia, thank you for persevering and joining. Great having you. Great seeing you guys. And we'll talk again soon.